You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Alright, hello Star Wars fans.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Connor.
And today we are talking about Star Wars.
And we're taking a look at a specific subject today that is going to be gaining some major traction. That is the High Republic. We have a new TV show that is coming out. At the time of this recording, a trailer has just dropped for Star Wars Acolyte, taking place in this general timeline. And there have been a series of EU books. In fact, there are 3 phases of expanded universe content that are all based around the High Republic. And before we take any deep dives, which we will do in the future, we're just going to do a brief overview of what is the High Republic all about? How is it different from the Star Wars universe that we're used to?
Yeah, for those who've listened to our previous episodes, we had episode 38, the Star Wars era overview, where we briefly touched on the High Republic. At that point, however, the High Republic had not yet released anything from Phase 3, and Connor and I were less familiar with it, and they had not yet released any other material about the Acolyte other than it would exist. So now we all know more about the High Republic, and interest is growing. We figured we would specifically take the High Republic and dive into what makes that era what it is, what we expect to see in that era, and what works are part of it.
Alex has done most of the work by doing how many novels worth of reading?
I think I'm at like 11 now. There's going to be somewhere between 16 and 20 novels total, as well as like 6 comic series, 3 full-length audio dramas, The Acolyte, and various other short stories, miniseries, manga series, and others, all included in the High Republic.
I would ask, as far as the High Republic goes, timeline-wise, it's a little bit fuzzy, but what's the general setting for when this takes place?
So the High Republic is set in the period between about 400 to 500 years before the Phantom Menace, up to about 100 years before the Phantom Menace.
Did we ever come up for a name of an era after that, like the Low Republic?
I believe that's called the Fall of the Republic.
Sure.
About when things start to deteriorate, and then leading up to the Clone Wars.
Gotcha. So what makes the High Republic so grand to be noted as being the brightest moments of the Republic?
So the High Republic is sort of the most recent zenith of influence, culture, art, and power for both the Jedi Order and the Republic itself, before the fall of the Republic and the Clone Wars, Order 66 and the rise of the Empire. Mm-hmm. So we see the Jedi themselves are established power and have a growing amount of influence in the galaxy. We see the Republic starting to spread out from the inner rim and mid rim into the outer rim, trying to become a source of light, hope, support, and representation for all of the disparate planets to bring, as they say, light and life to those. The tagline and rallying cry of the Republic during this period is "We are all the Republic." Sort of this notion that it's the collective health of the entire galaxy can be accomplished together. In the first phase, one of the primary characters is the Chancellor, Lina Soh, who is engaging in a series of great works, as capital G, capital W, to unify the galaxy and project the prestige, culture, power, influence, and altruism of the Republic.
So if this were to reflect a real-world era, what could we compare that to?
I mean, the great works are sort of a deliberate play on FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's sort of mutual works that he put together in the 1930s to revitalize the U.S. economy. You could also look at any kind of like post-war revitalization period, Europe post-World War II, the boom in Japan in the 1980s. You could perhaps even the Gilded Age period in the 1890s. Mm-hmm. All of these you could look to for if you're looking for real-world analogs. I find the FDR analogy to be most compelling myself. But whatever it is, so this isn't just that period. It's also the period leading up to it, a couple hundred years before, where we start to see these Republic Pathfinder teams and Jedi Pathfinders sent out to make contact with outer rim and mid-rim worlds that have been long disconnected from the Republic. As we know, the Republic has existed for thousands of years, but has waxed and waned in influence. Mm-hmm. So we even know in the High Republic there are Jedi enclaves that have only rarely been in touch, if at all, with the outpost in Coruscant and have their own traditions and teachings, and they bear the yoke of the Jedi Council lately, let us say.
ostensibly the war that this takes place after would be a war against the Sith, because we have no dark side analog in this time period. They're in hiding.
I mean, there are dark side users in Force cults, and the Jedi fight people. Let's mention most Jedi have never sparred against another. They spar for practice against each other, but most Jedi have never seen serious fighting whatsoever. They are peacekeepers. They might, and it's shown that the average smuggler or someone with a blaster bolt does not understand the power Jedi possess and stands no chance against them. There's one point in one novel where a Jedi Padawan, an older Padawan, so he's close to taking his trials, is being threatened by a smuggler with a single blaster who thinks the Jedi, he's like, oh, with his just fancy light stick. And he's like, why is he not realizing how much danger he's in? Because he's also threatening a young girl as a hostage. And so then when he seriously looks like he might shoot the hostage, the Padawan very regretfully slices his arm off after deflecting his blaster bolt. And the man is dumbfounded about, he deflected a blaster bolt and he cut my arm off. What are these Jedi? Because they were pacifist monks up until that moment, until it turns out they're just monks. The lightsabers are not for show.
We've talked about this where there is an actual term for disarming someone. Dismembering someone. A literal disarm. Disarm's gone. But anyway, veering into the Jedi a little bit more. So there's no Sith. They've been sparring against one another. What is their role in the Republic at this point in time? Because later we see that they're keepers of the peace, come generals of the Clone Wars. So
I think the High Republic starts to show both the Jedi at their zenith, but also the weaknesses that leave them in the state where we find them in The Phantom Menace, where Palpatine has clouded their vision. They're relatively easily suborned into becoming part of the Grand Army of the Republic. So this is the first period, I think, of greater than expected interconnection with the Republic government apparatus happens, and also where the Jedi Council starts to accede to the will of the Republic, because they do, even at this period, the Jedi consider themselves to be peacekeepers of the Republic. Like, they serve all citizens of the galaxy, but as an institution, they are loyal to the Republic and its ideals, and they are a peacekeeping arm of while they are independent, they serve as a peacekeeping arm of the Republic itself. In fact, the Republic has no standing military, so they rely on the Jedi as the primary source of peacekeepers. One of our primary villains of the High Republic period, the Nihil, a marauding band of pirates with a grand organization and a terrifying leader who is experimenting with dark side artifacts. Individual systems and clusters of systems have their own defense forces that can help, but most independent systems have no ability to fight off the Nihil and rely on the Jedi to do so. The Republic relies on the Nihil to do so, and the Jedi pay a heavy price for trying to fight off the Nihil themselves. They go from having never really fought anyone aside from individual skirmishes to having to militarize quickly to fight off the Nihil, in a development that not all of the Jedi Council agree with and are bitterly divided by.
It makes sense if we have this Republic who is ever expanding and ever trying to unify. Without a police force, you have this idealistic group who is backing the Republic. Of course, they're going to have to come into play when coming across the less than savory elements of the galaxy that are explored. So as far as the Nihil, they're marauding. Are they looking for power, riches, a stake of their own in the galaxy, independence? All of the above?
Kind of all of the above. So the Nihil at the start are just seen as just another Outer Rim pirate band, maybe slightly more successful than the rest. They have their own mythology, their own leadership, but unknown to the rest of the galaxy, they actually have unique technology that makes them uniquely vulnerable, and their leader has access to unique ancient dark side technology and artifacts that make him a particular enemy of the Jedi.
It all in the Sith? Does this dark side artifact business predate the Sith?
So Marchion Ro, the Eye of the Nihil, is not force sensitive himself, but he knows, which is why he's able to use what he does. He has access to ancient artifacts that specifically prey on force sensitives. So he hates the Jedi for so far unrevealed reasons. Presumably the climax of Phase 3 will reveal his motivations as he is finally forced into the light. But, so not to delve too deeply into any particular character, but this is one of the primary thrusts. So we have in the sort of later stage of the High Republic, which was established first. We have Lina Soh, great works, Republic expanding into the Outer Rim, encountering and fighting the Nihil, and the Nihil becoming a much greater threat than expected, killing a bunch of Jedi and Republic, resulting in the establishment of the Republic Defense Force, which was originally bitterly opposed, but then when the Nihil killed tens of thousands of people, it then becomes a necessity. And that's the Republic Defense Force as it exists when we see it in the Phantom Menace. That's one of the type of ship that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are in at the start of the Phantom Menace. That's the Republic ship, Republic Defense Force that they are part of. And that's the only force that exists until the Grand Army of the Republic established after Jar Jar Binks is manipulated into giving Palpatine emergency powers. So you can see the direct through line from originally the Republic was established as a federalist state. Every system or cluster of planets would have its own defense forces. There is no centralized federal galactic level military. And then the Nihil attack and forced the creation of one. And then that then sets the precedent for later on the Grand Army of the Republic. And then the Jedi, who work directly with the RDF here, are then invited to be generals by Palpatine. So it's setting a lot of the precedents that we see come up later in the Phantom Menace era.
You can argue as being the dawn of the fall of the Jedi.
Yeah. So going back to sort of the Jedi, which we had touched on earlier. So the Jedi in this era, you can see that they are more flexible than what we see in the Jedi Council in the Phantom Menace. So, but you can see that they have started to lose some of that flexibility. Even we're in a period of sort of uniformization happening, where right now, as we see in the High Republic, masters have a lot of leeway over the tenets that they teach to their Padawans. We have Jedi who are called way seekers, who are able to leave the Jedi Order for a time, not becoming Jedi, but obeying the will of the Force rather than the will of the Council to go do what they want. We see these isolated Jedi enclaves who have their own traditions, and while they nominally acknowledge the supreme control of the Jedi Council on Coruscant, they really do their own thing. There's not great communication in between those, with the communication network still being built out. So the Jedi themselves are more flexible, and they're also very positive. So we have, as an example, we have one Jedi who struggles against the dark side, Elzar Mann. He's kind of reminds me of Qui-Gon. He's sort of this non-traditional Jedi who likes to experiment with the Force and sees we get a lot about how the Jedi have different conceptions of the Force. We have Marshal Avar Kriss, who sees it as a great, the music of the Force. And then Elzar Mann sees it as a great machine with all these infinitely complex spinning devices contained within it. And so he struggles with the dark side and, in fact, calls upon the dark side in one of the books to kill a bunch of Nihil. But then at the end of the book, he approaches the leader of the Jedi Council, his best friend, falls to his knees and is like, I need help. And his friend just pulls him up, is like, we're going to get you help. And then we see him going to a therapeutic retreat with another Jedi at the start of the next book, where he has then challenged and is dealing with his dark side inclination. So we see, rather than immediately ostracizing him or kicking him out of the order, it's like, okay, we all struggle with this. We will help you. And we get more of that seeing in the High Republic. There is this support network, this acknowledgement that Jedi are still human, and they have human feelings. And while they practice this lack of attachment to avoid falling to the dark side, it's been effective for 1,000 years. You don't hear about a lot of Jedi falling to the dark side. Like even Elzar, who then struggles with it, doesn't. I don't think there is a single Jedi that I have read yet in the High Republic who has fallen to the dark side. I mean, we have some Jedi who are tempted by it. We have a Trandoshan Jedi seer who gets infected with a degenerative brain condition. And so he, instead of accepting the surrender of 2 Nihil, he murders them. They were still enemy combatants, so it was not great. So his lightsaber is confiscated, but the goal is not, we need to cast Sskeer out of the order and use him as a cautionary tale, a la Dooku. Dooku does leave voluntarily, or like Ahsoka. Instead, Sskeer needs help. He maybe cannot do the duties of a Jedi Order. Maybe he needs to go on a retreat. We have another Jedi who is captured by these dark side plant creatures, the Drengir, and is tortured by them for weeks. And so when he comes back, he has been forced to do some rather terrible things, but instead of being cast out of the Order, he decides to take a permanent retreat from the work of the Jedi and just seclude himself in contemplation with the Force on a faraway planet.
Cutting back to romance, because
We have, by the time of the prequels, any hint of that is, means for secrecy and expulsion and the immediate swift turn to the dark side. But how is that approached in the High Republic?
So it's still a challenge, but it's acknowledged. So we learn that it's almost like breaking curfew. Padawans will fool around with each other is kind of the expectation. It's like, you're a hormonal teenager, or you're in a temple with a bunch of other athletic, hormonal, magical teenagers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, things are going to happen, and there's sort of like polite, and it's like, and the Jedi Order is not celibate, so it's like no one takes a vow of celibacy. It's just it's expectation of non-attachment. Mm-hmm. So. It's implied that, yes, the Padawans will occasionally fool around with each other or have flings with other people. But by the time someone becomes a Jedi Knight, it's expected they've kind of worked through that and then are ready to dedicate themselves to the Order. Like, becoming a Jedi Knight is like, okay, you've had your Rumspringa, and you've gone out and maybe you've dabbled, and even if you may occasionally in the future, have physical needs, it's not going to impact your need as a Jedi Knight.
So they have to practice the non-attachment, but kind of like Coyote Mundi, who needs to procreate in order to allow his race to continue in the time of the prequel trilogy. We have still this idea that you do not form attachments, you do not form bonds. The only bond you have is with the living Force.
More of a hard line relatively recently. It's an ongoing standardization of Jedi customs. We're reaching out into there. We need to be the paragons. We need to obey our own rules. Mm-hmm. And not all Jedi agree with these changes. There's sort of an ongoing, is love part of the Force? Is it not? Mm-hmm. Or love is always, all the Jedi view love as a positive force. But in what way is dedication to one person or physical love supposed to be part of a Jedi's life? And some are it shouldn't be at all. Some are okay. We have a great character, Cantum Sai, who is a former Padawan of Yoda himself, who straight up leaves the Jedi Order for a couple of years because he falls in love with another person, and then leaves and goes on this journey as a bodyguard and courier and all these odd jobs throughout the galaxy. But then eventually saves a Force-sensitive girl from death and returns to the Jedi Order, realizing this is his goal in life. Their goal in life. He is Cantum Sai goes by they them pronouns. So Cantum Sai realizes that their needs are aligned with the Jedi Order. But Yoda, though it's difficult, allows him to do this. He's like, okay, if this is what you need, you will have a place back if you return. Hand me your lightsaber, and I will be here when you come back. And Cantum Sai does eventually return. But there was that flexibility to allow. I don't think Ahsoka felt like she had that freedom. There are not. By the time the Clone Wars happened, Obi-Wan, by the time of the book Padawan, which we haven't talked about specifically yet, but I've read, doesn't feel like he has the ability to take a temporary retreat from the Order.
It's all or nothing.
Qui-Gon Jinn doesn't feel like he can go be a Wayseeker anymore and maybe go his own way. Everyone has to be part of the Jedi Order now. So I think we're starting to see this codification and the way that the Jedi become rigid. But during the High Republic itself, they're still at this inflection point. It didn't have to be that way. Mm-hmm. The Jedi Order could have remained a more flexible organization, because it was successful with this flexibility and with this ability to accept new tenets and change and train people not to follow the dark side. It existed for 1,000 years successfully. And again, even in the High Republic, there are Jedi who were captured and tortured and subjected to the dark side, but I can't think of a single one who truly fell yet. Maybe I'll find one. I found a couple who are considering leaving the Jedi Order, but not default to the dark side, but just because they don't agree with the Council, which is very different. You become a Wayseeker or a Ronin. You don't have to necessarily fall to the dark side. But as you said, by the time of the Clone Wars, the options have become leave in disgrace, grin and bear it, or fall to the dark side.
And even by the time of the prequel trilogy, there's only 20 some odd Jedi that have left the Order willingly. or 20 or so Jedi who have left the Order, Dooku being one of them.
The full knights.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we get more about what knighthood means in that when you've accepted the role of Jedi Knight, it's a big commitment. You are then, it's supposed to be, you are now, and it's implied that Padawans often leave or wash out, and they're not counted as among the lost. It's like they made the attempt in the apprenticeship, maybe they decided the life wasn't for them. They always have the free ability to leave. Once you're a Jedi Knight, you can still do that, but it's then you are giving something up.
Right.
You're not just deciding not to commit yourself. It's almost becoming like affirmed or
Pass the trials.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you pass the trials and become a Jedi Knight. You've decided this is what you would like to dedicate your life to.
So before we take a look forward at Acolyte and just kind of speculating what may occur there, what other corners of the galaxy are explored in the High Republic novels and other ancillary material that are interesting or contrasting compared to the universe at large, or are there elements that are strikingly similar?
Largely absent. We encounter a few Sith artifacts, but they're mostly just being studied. The one is that it turns out the Sith had a war with the Drengir, the dark side plant creatures, and sealed them away, and they're accidentally freed again, and then have to be sealed away again by the Jedi. So, as far as like the aspects that define the High Republic, we have the growth of the Republic, and then they start to encounter these regional conflicts. There's something called the Forever War between the planets of Irem and Ireno. I'm probably mispronouncing one of those. But like when the Republic encounters it, then refugees start spreading all over, including, those planets are relatively near Jeddah. And it's mentioned that there's the Guardians of the Wills that live there, which respect the Jedi but are not part of them. You have these Force cults that spring up and have different understandings of the Force. They're, of course, freely. The Republic has religious freedom entirely, so no one is dictating that they can't have that. But the Jedi are sort of the officially endorsed take on the Force and have the authority of the Republic behind them. You have the Nihil are our primary antagonists, who are continually underestimated by the Republic and the Jedi. I think because they just see them as marauders, but in reality they are basically the personal army of the Eye of the Nihil.
Because we don't hear of Nihil at any point in Star Wars proper, I have a pretty good feeling at their fate.
But I do not think they succeed, but I don't think keeping them around permanently is Marchion Ro's goal. They're a means to an end for him. But I mean, eventually he establishes his own domain in the Outer Rim to take control of territory. And for those who have played Jedi Survivor, the fight against the Nihil was a big... we see the Nihil destroyed large parts of the High Republic facilities in the Outer Rim and caused them to abandon the planet of Tanalorr. So we have... the Nihil were a significant threat, especially for a Republic who was just starting to kind of come into its own and be powerful enough to, expand and engage in these great works. And the Jedi are completely unprepared for fighting with a fanatical enemy. Like, there's at least 3 or 4 times I can remember where they were fighting some Nihil, and the Jedi defeat and save the Nihil, and the Nihil, then turn and shoot someone else, or blows up the Jedi ship. And the Jedi just cannot help themselves. But then by adapting and then not saving them, do the Jedi then lose part of themselves? Right. So it's sort of this question is because there's a moment where a Jedi Master just catches there's a floating hover platform that's destroyed, and a bunch of people are plummeting to their death, including 4 civilians and a Nihil, and the Jedi Master force pulls all of them onto his ship and is like, okay, I've saved you, obviously you're not. And so then right there, the Nihil pulls out a grenade and blows up the ship and all of them there, including killing the Jedi Master. And I was thinking Anakin Skywalker would have just shot that guy out of the sky and picked up the civilians without a second thought. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi probably just letting the Separatists fall to his death.
Slice his hand off when he's holding the grenade.
Yeah, or expects that kind of treachery. So I think you're seeing there's this naive element to some of the Jedi where they're struggling to adapt, but then by adapting, I think it's where this confrontation forces them into this more rigid mold. So I don't think there's any easy answers there. I'm not going to say, the Jedi should just be killing all these combatants. You get frustrated with them, but it's like this commitment to their ideals that's what makes them who they are.
This sounds like a truly interesting antagonistic force where you have the Jedi who are servants of the peace, servants of the living force, servants of life, and if you break the word nihil up, it has its root in nihilism, which is the lack of care for.
It's definitely deliberate on their part. Yeah.
So you have a group who ideologically does not value life, even for themselves, going up against Jedi who value the life of all. So it's a harsh lesson, it seems, that the Jedi have to learn, and that perhaps in sacrificing an enemy, they're going to be saving more innocent lives, which would go against, the purely life for the sake of life organization. So,
other than Jedi, we see smugglers and scrappers and traders. We see exploitative shipping owners being cast down by the Republic, turned in by their own people. We see the Santeca and Graf families, who were hyperspace prospectors, rise to prominence. We know that Lord Santeca eventually becomes a Force artifact collector and works with Luke, and he's the one that gives Poe Dameron the location, the Outer Rim map he needs to locate Luke Skywalker. So we get a lot of great world building, and it fits very well with what comes after. We have, Jedi with purple lightsabers and yellow lightsabers, and one who found an ancient Sith lightsaber on her calling and purified them to make her white lightsaber. So we have different dueling styles. We see Corellia back when it was still a fun place to be, sort of politically stagnant and kind of violent, but also vibrant and lively, and not just clogged with gray smoke and corruption.
Like a total Mandalore by the sounds of it.
Yeah, just corrupt, but in like the sleazy 1920s way, and not the Vichy regime way.
So, I guess transitioning here, we have this such rich background that's being built in the books, and then you have clods like myself who don't remember how to read, and who will be experiencing the High Republic firsthand with the show Acolyte. And we've had a short trailer that's dropped, and from it, I mean, we can see a lot of what has been discussed here, where we have the Jedi at their height, where it looks like they're flourishing. We have Jedi abound in plenty, and who are fighting very capably against seemingly dark side Acolyte. And so this takes place 100 years before the Phantom Menace, so I'm guessing this is going to be emblematic of the end of the High Republic, whatever shape or form that might be. We can't speculate too much, other than there's a Wookiee Jedi, which makes me so excited.
There's another Wookiee Jedi also.
Excellent.
Uriaga, who is a Padawan in the Phase 1. So, and then this is another Wookiee Jedi 100 years in the future. Because a Wookiee live a long time. And
yeah.
So Acolyte appears to be set 100 years before the Phantom Menace. I think there's just a couple of recurring characters from the other High Republic media, because the High Republic is spanning several centuries, so you can have a lot of people around. Only very long-lived characters would still be around, such as Yoda.
We have to get a Yoda cameo. It can't just be a mention. That's necessary. It's been since The Last Jedi since we've seen Yoda in any fiction, so everybody loves a good Yoda.
Yeah, so you'll see lots of gold and gilt and fancy, clean flying ships. Definitely, this is like before the sort of used future part. This is our crystal spires and people walking around wearing gold robes and togas period of science fiction. So deliberate contrast to, I think, the giant floating platforms in the High Republic and Jedi Survivor. This is revitalization, but I think the Jedi themselves are not terribly violent. So we have a couple of, I think, powerful warriors, but in one of the shots, it's like, these 20 Jedi all pulling out their lightsabers. Like, have some of these ever pulled their lightsaber out?
Right.
And other than sparring, some of them haven't ever pulled their lightsaber out before.
Some people are like, oh, Palpatine cut down these other Jedi so quickly. I'm like, okay, yeah, they were masters during the Clone Wars, but so if some of these Jedi just get cut by this Acolyte, it would probably be because they've never actually fought anyone before.
Yeah.
Being more sensitive to advantages, but if you haven't ever, it's even shown by the Nihil, they're not trained in expecting to fight actual battles, like individual skirmishes and fights against smugglers and slavers is one thing. Fighting a pitched battle is quite another.
Yeah, because even at this point in the High Republic, they're fighting against these marauders. They're not fighting on a level playing field against another skilled bladesmith, swordsmith. That's someone who makes the swords. Another duelist. There we go. So, and it's useless to speculate who is this red lightsaber wielder, even though I will speculate right now because it's fun. Too early for Palpatine. Palpatine is not, that old in the Phantom Menace. He might be in his 50s, 60s, so it's not him. It could very well just be a stranger acolyte in a mask. It could be one of the Jedi who have secretly fallen to the dark side and has not revealed that to their compatriots. But I agree entirely that the Jedi are not prepared at all to fight a dark side person, let alone a Sith. So it'll be an interesting means of... this isn't exactly the dawn of the Republic in the universe, but this is the proto-story that we get before the Skywalker saga begins, the build-up to that.
If anyone wants to check out the High Republic, there are a variety of works that comprise it. It's released in 3 phases. I do recommend going phase 1, then phase 2, then phase 3, whatever degree of which you each would like to take in. So for each phase, there is between 6 and 9 novels. The novels are split into usually the adult novels, the young adult novels, and the junior novels. But characters interweave between all of those. Like a character like Vernestra Rowe, who is going to appear in the Acolyte, appeared in a junior novel, and then in the next was in a young adult novel. Then showed up in the comic series, mentioned in an audio drama, and then came into an adult novel as a main character. So
you'll be the green one when you watch Acolyte in the future, the bald green one.
Yes.
Yeah, she's a Myralian, the same race as Master Luminara and Barriss Offee.
So that's Vernestra. But and then if you are an audio drama person, each of the phases has a fully acted audio drama. The one for phase 3 is coming out, I think, within a year. But phase 3 is still ongoing, which will conclude the High Republic period, I think, along with the Acolyte. So if you're just looking for a flavor of it, check out a couple of the books from phase 1. Phase 2 then flashes back 200 years to sort of the first expansion period and is exploring this forever war between 2 planets, and the Nihil aren't around yet, but then shows where did these force-eating creatures that Marchion Ro uses come from. So
we have a trilogy, or a phase, followed by a prequel phase, followed by a sequel phase. For those of you who might be, thinking that sounds familiar, just remember it's all like poetry. It rhymes.
Yeah, and I think that's a deliberate choice. So they establish it, then they do the prequel, and then they do the sequel. Though I think the sequel's set like 3 years after the original and not 30.
Before the Acolyte show comes out June 4th, we will likely have an expanded universe touch upon what's happening in the High Republic, just as a lead-in. But otherwise, this is, if you remember from our era overview episode, this is something that is brand new to Star Wars. This has not been explored in Legends whatsoever. This is fresh ground for creators, and it sounds like they are doing an excellent job at establishing a different kind of world that leads into what we're familiar with.
It's some of my favorite Star Wars content. It does everything I love about Star Wars, and that it's a multimedia project that has continuity between those, and any entry point is good, but then we'll leave you breadcrumbs if you'd like to check something out. Like, man, that Trandoshan Master sounded really cool. Hey, there's a comic series that talks all about him. It's like, oh man, the Nihil look really violent. Oh, would you like to read the short story introduction about Marchion Ro? It's like, oh, I'm kind of interested in this character of Lorna D. She seems really conflicted, but also really evil. And it's like, well, would you like to read her audio drama backstory about how she was a slave turned Jedi, turned protege, non-Force Master protege of a Jedi Master who checked up on her, turned leader of a crime syndicate?
This is what people are asking for when they say they want Star Wars, but they don't want the same Star Wars. There's no Skywalker, there's no Vader, there's no Empire, there's no TIE Fighters, X-Wings. It is Star Wars, but
there's a tiny bit of Yoda. There's a Chancellor of the Republic, but it's all new. There's dark side plants, creatures that devour sentient intellect. There are marauding pirates with a sort of a spike core punk theme that wear gas masks and engage in terrorist attacks. There's Does not shy away from violence, the challenges that Jedi have, but I highly recommend anyone who's into Star Wars. It's probably the most exciting Star Wars thing alongside Andor and The Mandalorian coming out right now. So give it a go.
And especially for those dissenters of the Acolyte trailer, it's a trailer. There's a lot of background leading into this. You did not read the books, much like myself, and the lack of literature makes one angry. I can speak that from personal experience, but for now, this is a very exciting time and exciting era, and stay tuned for more when we explore the High Republic in a bit more detail in the future.
Thank you for listening. This has been our overview of the High Republic. Remember, we are all the Republic, and we fight for light and life.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.